Nau mai, hoki mai, and welcome back to Breakfast. It is 18 to 7. Australia will send officials to New Zealand later this year to brief the government on AUKUS pillar developments. The announcement came following a joint meeting between our foreign and defence ministers. Otago University Robert Patman is across the detail and joins me this morning. Morena, Professor Patman, thank you so much,
Jenny,
as always, for being with us. Before we even get to AUKUS, because I know there were developments yesterday, can we just talk about how important this meeting is? This is the very first time that talks between all four ministers, and we're talking about defence and foreign affairs, with New Zealand and Australia have met before. So how significant is this?
Well, it's unprecedented, and I think it reflects what the new national-led coalition government says. It wants to add urgency and closer alignment with traditional allies. So I suppose, in a sense, the fact that the defence minister and our foreign minister have been dispatched to Melbourne reflects that, to meet with their counterparts.
Now, AUKUS, we know that that is the deal between Australia, the UK and also the US. New Zealand has expressed an interest in that alliance, and I note that you have said that any movement towards AUKUS would come at a diplomatic cost. Why?
Well, politics is often about choices between the disagreeable and the intolerable. There are very few painless options available, and the government has to. The government's in an exploratory stage. It's trying to pursue Pillar 2, as it's called, the non-nuclear part of the AUKUS agreement. And one of the benefits on offer there is access to cutting-edge defence technology. But the government has to weigh that up carefully against some of the potential pitfalls. And that's going to be, an exercise political judgment. What is interesting is what's come out of this meeting in Melbourne is that the Australians are sending a delegation over to brief New Zealand. But I wasn't quite clear from the documentation available so far, and it is an unfolding story, exactly who they were going to brief, because Mr. Clarkson said during the election campaign that he wanted a bipartisan approach to foreign policy. Will the Australian delegation be briefing parliamentarians in general, not just National New Zealand First or ACT? Just who will they be briefing? That's an interesting question.
You talked earlier about the pitfalls when it comes to showing an interest in AUKUS. Now, China has already expressed their concerns, and I just wonder what a relationship with AUKUS would do with our relationship with China.
Well, it would, I think, be a huge disappointment to China. Not that that should worry us per se, because we're a liberal democracy and they're an authoritarian state. But I think it would be seen not just in China, but in the Pacific Island states, as well as ASEAN, which are many Asian Pacific countries that we would like to have better, even stronger relations with, might be seen as a bit of a retreat from our independent foreign policy to one that's more closely in lockstep with what might be described as the Anglosphere, English-speaking countries.
We've spent much of this conversation on AUKUS. I just wonder whether we can switch to the Middle East, and
Sure.
How much of these talks do you think will be centred around what is happening in the Middle East, but also our approach to what's going on?
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed by the joint communique that was released. Australia and New Zealand had, by December last year, moved to a position where they voted in the General Assembly for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, and there was a degree of urgency behind that diplomatic. I didn't see that in the joint communique. Both sides express concern about the appalling humanitarian the humanitarian situation, I should say, in Gaza. But, this is another thing here. You're quite right, Jenny May, to raise this issue, because AUKUS and the Gaza situation are linked. Why are we interested in AUKUS? In principle, because it's designed to strengthen the rules-based system. What has happened in Gaza has shaken many people's confidence that the US is sticking to the international rules-based system in providing unconditional support to Israel in its response to the appalling Hamas terrorist attack on the 7th of October. I would have liked to see in the communique that Australia and New Zealand would urge the United States to rethink its opposition to a permanent ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah, that's really interesting because my final question to you is how can Australia and New Zealand recognise the need for that immediate and that permanent solution in the Middle East and what's going on in Gaza, yet simultaneously back the US and the UK military's activity in the region? And I guess, thinking about the shipping in the Red Sea.
Yes, this is a particular problem for New Zealand because we have a different worldview from both the UK and the United States. We actually want to strengthen what's called the international rules-based system, not just preserve it. Since Peter Fraser, the New Zealand Prime Minister between 1940 and 49, we've been committed to opposing the use of the veto. And what we've seen in Gaza is the use of the veto 3 times to thwart the overwhelming view of the majority of countries that want a ceasefire there. But yes, I mean, this is something that the government's going to have to wrestle with. And I think it will be wise for the government to consult as widely as possible, because I think having a bipartisan foreign policy is a great asset for New Zealand. It gives our decision makers, I think, more clout when they negotiate with their foreign counterparts. So it's something I wouldn't, it would be regrettable if the New Zealand government, in the present government, actually moved away from that. But that's, of course, a political judgment they will have to make.
Professor Robert Patman joining us this morning. Thank you so much, as always.
Thank you.
Tēnā koe.